Hello, I'm Alex, this is LibreGraphics World, and today I'm talking about a new version of GIMP, which is 2.10.16. But let's start with a little disclaimer. Apart from writing for LibreGraphics World, I also am a non-coding contributor to GIMP. So if at some point you think that this guy could be biased about this program, yeah, I am. Okay, so starting with the 2.10 series, as you probably know, new features are allowed into new and stable releases. So what it means is that now people get regular updates just several months apart, which have major improvements like usability fixes, new tools, new filters, and so on, which is a lot better than having to wait for that for 4 to 6 years. What's very cool about this particular release is that it fixes a lot of gripes people had with GIMP. So let's start with those. The first thing you are going to notice immediately is that the toolbox got smaller. That is because tools are now logically grouped by default, just like in some other image editors that you might have used in the past. To open the list of tools, left-click and hold, or just right-click. Another not quite discoverable way to change a tool in a group is to hover the group and then scroll the mouse wheel. So move is grouped with Align Distribute. There are 3 groups of selection tools, 2 groups of transformation tools, there is a group for fill tools, 1 group of painting tools, and then the eraser is on its own because it rules them all, I suppose. Then there's a group of cloning tools. Then smudge, blur, sharpen and dodge burn are grouped together, and then the last group is the color picker and the measure tool. The overall effect is that the toolbox looks cleaner, especially when you don't dock any dialogues below. Now, I know from reading the feedback that people generally cheered on this change, but not everyone agreed, so while these are the new defaults, you can go ahead and customize the hell out of this feature. For that, go to Edit, Preferences, Interface, Toolbox. Now, you can disable this feature entirely by ticking off this checkbox here that says Use Tools Groups. Or you can make your own groups and reorganize tools the way you like it by just picking and then dragging tools around. The changes will show up in the toolbox immediately. By the way, if you customize GIMP to only show the toolbox at the left side, this message here probably used to annoy you a lot. Well, now it's gone. And since there had to be some replacement for it, to make docking obvious, GIMP will now highlight dockable areas when you start dragging a dockable dialog. And then the next change quite a few people might like is a higher contrast variation of the symbolic icon theme. There have been numerous reports that the new default symbolic icon theme doesn't have enough contrast. So this is a temporary workaround for people who want a bit more punch in the toolbox. The customization interface is right where it was, on the icon theme page of the Preferences dialog. The team is looking forward to improving this even further in the GTK3 based version of GIMP, where it could be possible to use CSS to customize icon themes, similarly to how it works in upcoming Inkscape 1.0 release. The next change that is very much visible is the new compact style for sliders. Okay, so here's the problem. I know I'm a GIMP contributor and I'm probably supposed to be fighting for its quirks to the death. But seriously, the old slider sucked so much, even though it was actually added to improve the user experience, which it did, but only up to the point. The vertical separation into smaller and default increment areas was not very discoverable for new users and, let's be honest, not really all that convenient for experienced users. The numeric input field got in the way. And the height of the widget was so large that for tools with a lot of settings like the paintbrush, people had to scroll up and down to move around settings all the time. So the new compact style widget changes a lot. It's compact so you get to see more, it has vastly better interaction model, so you can use modifiers and just the left click, and the numeric input is just there for when you need it. This is how the interaction works now. You can just single-click with the left mouse button anywhere to set a new value. You can left-click and drag to change a value with the default increment. Then you can press Shift and left-click and drag, or just right-click and drag to change a value with a smaller step. This is something people commonly do when they use a small brush and need to change the size just a little bit. You can press Ctrl and left click to change value with a larger step, like going from a small brush to a much larger brush very fast. Instead of left clicking, you can use all these new modifiers with the mouse wheel scroll. Now, about the numeric input. Whenever you click anywhere on the slider, the numeric input mode gets activated, but it doesn't really get in the way. The blinking text cursor just sits there, waiting for your input. Simply type the value and press Enter or Tab to confirm. You can deactivate the numeric input by pressing Escape. There are two more things worth telling here. First, you can middle click on the slider to just enter the numeric input mode without changing the value. And if you right click, you both enable the numeric input mode and select the value, which is handy if you want to replace the value completely rather than adjust it. Again, you can disable all of this. I really have no idea why you would want the old gigantic slider back, but yeah, you can do that in preferences. The next series of changes makes global transformation tools way more usable. It starts with the Composited preview option that essentially fixes a bad workaround added many years ago. Here's the problem. When you have multiple layers, each one with its own blending mode and opacity, transforming it means it pops up right above every other layer. So in a complex layers composition, you can't align this layer against other layers without much trial and error. So the new Composited preview option removes this workaround in favor of rendering the preview of the transformed layer exactly where it is in the layer stack, exactly with the blended mode of choice. It comes with a sub-option called Synchronous preview that is more experimental. The idea is to render the preview as soon as you change the transform. So instead of waiting for the mouse to stop moving, it renders the result immediately. If GIMP can render everything fast enough, that means a much smoother and more instant feedback. But this option also blocks everything until the preview is done rendering. This means GIMP can become much less responsive, usually when the layer is very large. That's why this is disabled by default. And then there's another new option to enable displaying transformation of all linked layers rather than the currently selected one. Again, something people have been expecting to happen for many years. Now, all that might seem like too many optional features that are completely sensible and should be on by default anyway. Which is true, but the problem is that all these new things tend to become sluggish as the image size gets larger. Now, all of this will change once map rendering lands to GIMP. If you're not familiar with the concept, here is the general idea. What you see on the screen will be separated from the actual data. So on the screen you will be interacting with a much smaller or lower resolution version of the original image, and in the background the program would silently process all this original data. This is quite similar to how proxies in video editing work. So this way, working on large images will become a lot faster, a lot more responsive. However, at this point I can't really say, and well, nobody can really say which version of GIMP will have that. Another change here that is in fact not optional is the clipping preview on the canvas. Supposing you rotate a layer. Once the data goes outside the layer boundary, you have several options how GIMP should clip it. Adjust is the default option and it means no clipping. It does look clipped by default, but if you enable the Show All option, there it is. Clip means just keep whatever is inside the layer boundary and drop the rest. Crop the result will try to find the largest possible rectangle of original data inside this rotated bounding box. And crop the ratio will do the same while maintaining the original ratio between width and height. So what's different about it is that previously GIMP displayed the cropping only after you applied the transformation, which means again more trial and error. Now you get to see everything while doing the actual transformation. Another major new feature is a new global transformation tool called 3D Transform. It's going to be helpful for cases when you need to rotate an image as if it was stretching towards a vanishing point. Now, if you do something like adding a screenshot over a blank screen of a MacBook Pro mockup, then you have a real perspective reference and it's not a problem. But if you don't, this is going to be kind of difficult, because first you need to have a good eye for perspective, and then secondly, the perspective tool itself requires quite a lot of patience. With the new tool, you don't have to try hard to make the perspective stretch believable. You just switch to the tool, change the vanishing point position if you need to, and then rotate, or pan, or both. That is really all. At your preference, you can either drag sides of a layer on the canvas to rotate like in 3D modeling software, or use numeric input in the on-canvas dialog. You can also use modifiers to constrain rotation to just one axis of your choice. Now, in all honesty, I don't think I was trying to turn GIMP into full-fledged 3D modeling software or texture painting software. We already have great free tools like Blender and Armor Paint. However, there are quite a few valid use cases when this is going to be helpful, like for example taking a perspective photo of a building and slapping a logo over it, which means you have to rotate it in 3D and maybe scale, which is actually the reason why this tool could probably benefit from having a scale tool embedded into it. The next chunk of updates is for people who use GIMP for drawing and painting. The major change here is that starting with this version, you should see a much smoother brush outline motion on the canvas. There are two major reasons for that. One is that several years ago, Al, who is one of the most active contributors, separated translating brush strokes into pixels and updating the display. These are in fact two different things. See, when you paint in software, you drag a mouse pointer or styles, and that sends some information to the brush engine in the program. How fast you draw, in what direction, how much pressure you apply while drawing, whether you rotate or tilt the styles, and so on. The brush engine takes all that into consideration, then maps it all to various brush settings like size, spacing, and so on, and then writes all the data as actual depths, as pixels, into the layer that you paint on. Then it updates the display, which means actually showing the depth you made and updating the position of the brush outline. Until fairly recently, this approach meant that the brush engine couldn't go back to translating your brush strokes into pixels until the display update was done rendering. From user standpoint, it looked like the software couldn't keep up with your drawing. And that was, well, I would say frustrating, but that was really more like infuriating. So Al fixed that several releases ago, and now GIMP translates your brushstrokes into pixels and updates the display separately from each other. The rate at which brushstrokes were rendered to the display was already high enough, so the last missing bit was the rate at which brush outline was updated. So Al went ahead and made a very quick fix, changing the refresh rate from 20 FPS to 120 FPS. It was a really tiny, small one-line fix in the source code, but it made a lot of visual difference. And then there's a second reason why the brush outline motion should now be smoother. See, before GIMP used to snap the brush outline to the center of the last brush dab you made. It was especially visible with large spacing values, and it felt like you made one dab and then you had to break away from it to the next dab, and then again and again and again. It felt like really choppy behavior. So what Al made is turning this into an option and then disabling it by default. So now painting with large spacing between each dab shouldn't feel nearly as choppy as before. For people who use a lot of Photoshop brushes, the program should start a lot faster now. This is because GIMP used to use a very inefficient way to load these files. To give you an idea just how much faster that is now, I went ahead and did a quick test. First of all, I downloaded a bunch of brushes from DeviantArt, and some of them were provided by a fellow GIMP user, 7x. I ended up with 214 megabytes of ABR brushes, and that's also 33 files, I think. Then I built two versions of GIMP, one before the fix and one after the fix. Then I used the profile that El created a while ago so that developers could investigate various inefficiencies in the program. Basically, what it does is writing a log of how much time it takes various programs' functions to complete. In this particular case, I was interested in how much time it takes GIMP to load brushes at the startup. Then I created logs for both of these versions. So here is the performance log viewer showing the first log where there is no fix. As you can see, that's a little over 28 seconds. Not exactly unbearable, but a really long time. Now, here's the data for the version of GIMP where this is fixed. We are looking at a little less than 2 seconds of time spent parsing and loading ABI. It's highly likely that I will apply the same lazy loading magic to brushes and other resources that he applied to fonts almost 2 years ago. So basically at the startup, GIMP will load all these resources in parallel, so you will see the user interface immediately, and then the loading of the resources will be completed in the background. At this point, however, I can't say which version of GIMP will have that. There are also two small convenience changes. First is the new pivot selector widget that you can see in the on-canvas dialog for the rotation tool. Supposing you want your layer to be rotated around the point that isn't the center of that layer. Before, if you wanted that pivot point to be, say, the middle of the left side here, you had two options. One was to try really hard to drag the point exactly to the middle of the side, which usually means squinting and swearing. The other option was to calculate the position of a guide so that it would go exactly through the middle of the layer and then drag the pivot to snap to the intersection of the guide and the layer's boundary. Now you have this little widget where you can click to set the pivot's position to one of 9 common presets. The center, one of 4 corners, or one of 4 midpoints. Another convenience change was introduced by a new contributor who calls himself or herself Whoop. What it does is basically consolidating the user interface of merging layers, anchoring floating selections. So when you have a floating selections, it will show the button for anchoring it, and when you have none, then it would show the button for merging layers. You can also use this button with several modifiers. If you want to merge all layers inside the layer group, select the layer group, press Shift and then click the button. If you want all visible layers to be merged, press Ctrl and click the button. You will see a dialog with some options. And if you want to merge visible layers with the settings that you last used in that dialog, press Ctrl and L together, then click the button. The last major change in this release was introduced by Jean Pages from the Marmot project. Now every time you start GIMP, it will check whether a new version of GIMP is available, and if it is, it will tell you so. This is handy because quite a few users don't follow development and thus miss out on updates which bring bug fixes, usability improvements and new features. What it does is basically reading a file on GIMP server that says which version is the most recent one and then comparing that version to the version installed on your computer. The update checker also looks for revisions of existing versions. Here's what it means. GIMP relies on quite a few third-party components like reading this or that file format. Like any other software, these components are prone to bugs and security issues. So when there is a fix available, what GIMP developers typically do is repackage existing installers. Since no code in GIMP has changed, this does not qualify as a new version. So if you are a Windows or macOS users, you will get a notification that an updated installer is available. Finally, let's talk about what's coming next for GIMP in 2020. While the team keeps making new 2.10 series releases every 3 to 4 months, the real focus is on completing the GTK 3 port and the refactoring. Here is why this is important. Everybody, and I mean everybody, including developers, wants GIMP to gain non-destructive editing as soon as possible. This has been scheduled for version 3.2 for quite a long time, it hasn't been postponed, nothing has really changed. But right now GIMP relies on the old version of the user interface toolkit, which has bugs. It's also obsolete, so its developers don't even review patches for it anymore, which is understandable. Besides, high DPI displays are now pretty much the norm, and unlike GTK 3, the second version of the toolkit doesn't handle them at all. GIMP developers had to invent clever ways to trick the toolkit into working on high DPI displays, and it all falls apart once you do things like using two monitors with different resolution. And that's just one of the scenarios where it all goes terribly wrong for high DPI display users. So GIMP really needs to move to the next version of the toolkit to stay maintainable. The other part of the effort is refactoring. Here's what it means. Basically, when developers look at the code they wrote years ago, they tend to find mistakes. Now, some of those mistakes are very easy to fix. Some are not so easy, and then there are design decisions. So when there is a lot of bad design decisions accumulated over the years, you just can't build new features that will work reliably and perform well. GIMP is 24 years this year, and it's also around 1 million lines of source code. As you can imagine, refactoring it is not an easy job to do. However, it seems that soon enough the first development release in the 2.99 series will be out. Then there will be several more releases, and then version 3.0 will be out. It usually takes 2 or 3 development releases for developers of GIMP to gain the sense of just how much effort it takes to complete working on this version, cut the release and code stable. So for 2020 we are most likely looking at 2 or 3 more releases in the 2.8 series and maybe 1 or 2 development releases in the 2.99 series. Again, this is just my gut feeling, I could be entirely wrong, we shall see. With that, thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel if you liked it, write in the comments about things you disliked, I am really curious about your feedback. Thank you and see you soon.